Miss
in the room.
Anderson just came in.
Okay. All right, let me know when you're all ready. We'll go ahead and get started.
We're ready whenever you are.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Hope you all had a great weekend. I see we have packed agenda today. We have 3 items on our agenda. So let's start with an introduction. I'll start first. I'm Dimple Ajmera, committee chair and at-large member. So for those in the room, you guys want to go first?
James Mitchell, committee member.
LaWanna Mayfield, committee member.
Dante Anderson, committee member.
Braxton Winston at large, serving as Mayor Pro Tem.
Marie Harris, strategy and budget.
Ja Liu, strategy and budget.
Dana Fenton with the city manager's office.
Tina Adams, internal audit.
And Brent Cagle, assistant city manager.
And for those of you who are joining us virtually, Mr. Bukhari,
Tarek Bakari, District 6.
staff members who are joining us virtually. Miss Murray, did you introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am, I'm in the room. I'm just looking for hands raised as well on the WebEx. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started here. We have 3 items on our agenda. We have Housing and Jobs Summit planning, and that was something referred to this committee by the mayor to provide feedback as to what you would like to see being discussed at the summit from this committee's perspective. And then second item we have, which is a standing item for the Budget Governance Committee, which is the internal audit plan. So Ms. Tina Adams will walk us through what that looks like, and will give us an overview of the audit currently in progress and audits that are planned for fiscal year 2023. And the third item that we have, which is the federal and state legislative agenda, and this is one of the other items that is a standing item to this committee as we continue to develop a strategy for our intergovernmental relations. So let's go ahead and get started. Mr. Cagle, if you could walk us through the summit referral and what are the expectations out of this committee as we discuss this item.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you. I will be very brief on this. This is just to point out, this is really for staff. Our role in this discussion is really to listen and to understand from City Council and the committees your input related to staff being able to develop an agenda for the summit. So as you mentioned, this is a referral from the mayor. The mayor has asked that the committees look at this and then report out this evening so the staff can then better understand what that agenda looks like as we start to schedule the Housing and Jobs Summit. The mayor has asked each committee to look at these items in reference to the committee charge. I will, as a reminder, say that BGIR committee, the charge is to review and recommend policies to fund community priorities, optimize use of public resources, and collaborate with other government partners. Next slide. And then the mayor also asked that each committee look at this in context of the 2040 plan and the 10 goals outlined in that plan. And so this final slide I have is really just a refresher to the committee members and everyone related to the comprehensive plan's 10 goals. With that, I will wrap up and staff will start to listen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cagle. So before committee members start providing feedback, what I would like to see as we see this, as we discuss Housing and Jobs Summit, I would like to see for each proposal what would be the budget implication? Um, specifically from the capital spend perspective on our housing, on our economic development, specifically jobs, and then also infrastructure. And I know that's something also the staff is preparing to have that discussion in December. So I'd like to see each proposal's budget implications. And that's all I have. Committee members, any comments, feedback, questions?
Madam Chair, James, just a couple of thoughts. I think for me is, number one, our audience. We need to have some type of conversation who will be invited to attend. Is that invitation list also something that council members can make a recommendation? Councilmember Anderson and I was in a previous meeting, and we both kind of agree that we got to have the right people in the room so we can ensure that we get the right results from the Housing and Job Summit. So I do think the invitation list is very important, and is the date when we would like to have the Housing and Job Summit, particularly when you think about the holidays about to approach us between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I don't know if there's something we tee up 2023, or we try to find a date before end of the year. And then the most important is, what is our expectation from the Housing and Job Summit? And I think I would like to hear other committee members kind of weigh in, and we collectively kind of come up with a core expectation of what we hope to accomplish. I think the narrative is very clear. We cannot build our way out of affordable housing. I have to thank my colleague, Councilmember Mayfield. She's always been passionate about we need jobs. We need jobs so people can afford, what's your famous word, price?
Diverse price point housing.
Yeah, device price point housing is her famous words, but she's always tied that to jobs. So the second part of this summit is very important, and I think we need to have some indication. What are the current jobs for the future? Who can help? Who will be our partners collaborating that provide those job skills that they would need? And so they're making $10 an hour, and then after they do the training, they start making $25 an hour. And so I do think having that type of discussion, identifying our partners, identifying the jobs, is just as important. So those are kind of my initial thoughts, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I have 3 items. I have really the date around the summit, the guest list as to who is being invited to, and then expectations. Anything else?
Madam Chair, actually, I have a question for staff. So staff stated that this was a referral from the mayor's office. Was there any conversation, going back to Councilmember Mitchell's question of what is the expectations? What was the mayor's expectation when the discussion of this summit first started? Because I know initially it was moved back because council members were not really aware of the summit and what the goal is. So it will be helpful to get some background and understanding as to why this summit was initially created.
Fair enough. Mr. Cagle, could you go back to the previous slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Very, very details. Okay, so,
And Mr. Cagle was about to answer my question.
okay, Mr. Cagle?
What I was about to say is that the mayor made this referral on October 10th. We can distribute the referral out to the committee again and make sure that all of the committee members have the referral. In the referral, the description or background of the referral states, a Housing and Jobs Summit was previously planned for October 20th and 21st to allow for more time to fully engage all council committees in a holistic approach to tackling these issues. The summit is being delayed. To optimize the use of our time working together at the summit, the mayor is requesting specific input from all committees to help establish the groundwork. The policy question is, as we work toward addressing the community's needs for more housing and job options for all Charlotteans, What strategies in the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan should we explore?
So thank you, Mr. Cagle. I also wanted to be able to have that in the minutes for the community and those that may be watching, for them to know why we're having this conversation. I support and agree with my colleague, Mr. Mitchell, regarding having a better understanding of who's the audience. Is this a conversation where we're going to involve and engage the community that we're talking about, we're attempting to create solutions for, to find out from them exactly what are the needs that they see on the ground? Or is this a discussion that's going to be happening midday where it's only going to be developers and corporate community? Because the time of day also makes a big difference as far as who has the opportunity for engagement in this process, and understanding what the expectation of the summit is. I do know that we're going to be having some conversations, hopefully today, regarding potential jobs of the future. What does that look like? Knowing that I think it will be helpful to get some updated numbers, if possible, not necessarily before the summit, but to get some numbers of what is the cost of living in the city of Charlotte today. So we can put a number out there saying, here's our goal that we want to identify the workers to achieve 2025, whatever that is. But we've also seen a major change in the market. And that change is definitely led by the business community. So what is the cost of living today for a two-family household and beyond, since a lot of our conversations are around the 80 and below and 30% and below, and a lot of it consists of multiple members of a family, 4, 5, 6, but are we also making sure that there's opportunities for single individuals or two household individuals, whether they're a couple or family? Thank you.
And Ms. Ajmira, we also have a question for Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Mr. Winston?
Thank you. I'm going to have to excuse myself from the meeting probably after this. So specifically to this committee, I would hope, one, we really have to understand our budget constraints moving forward as it relates to prolonged rising of interest rates. That's really going to affect how we operate, not only over this next year, but as we form our budgets over these next several years. So I hope coming out of this summit, we can have at least some conversation of what the implications of this new kind of economic environment are going to mean about the types of decisions that we have to make as a council and as a community. And from an intergovernmental standpoint, I think we should really dig into the comp plan goals, where there are several considerations for intergovernmental work to get new tools and figure out how to repurpose existing tools. So I think we should really kind of go into that plan. And what was it, like 326 recommendations, several of those in different places, specifically when we're thinking about environmental, affordable housing. There's the need for intergovernmental strategies there. Let's go back and look into that document. And then, of course, transportation, right? Transportation is what connects homes to jobs, housing to jobs. And we certainly have a lot of intergovernmental work to do there. I hope that we can consider some type of deliverables. These are things that we talked about, but we need to know, I think, coming out of there, what's our approach, what is our intergovernmental approach to that, to make, again, to connect housing and jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. So, budget implications, intergovernmental approach. I would also like to add one more item to that list. We have many economists predicting a recession within the next year. So as we develop a strategy to address the housing and jobs, what are we also doing to address a recession, and how are we planning ahead of that, especially from the reserves perspective, and also how do we go ahead and address additional capital investment needs.
And Ms. Ajmir, Ms. Anderson also had some input.
Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with all my colleagues around being outcomes-based and having intentionality before we walk into it as to what we want to see as an outcome for the summit. And I also, of course, agree with the macroeconomic environment that we're in and how we can be thoughtful and proactive versus being reactive in this environment. As it relates to jobs and the job options for all Charlotteans, I think it's going to be important for us to think about how we can infuse conversations around reskilling, upskilling, and workforce development for the jobs that are largely tech and advanced that we're going to attract in the city's future, and how do we prepare our residents for those jobs, whether they have a 2 or 4 year degree or not, but standing up programs where they can very quickly become reskilled and upskilled. The other piece I think we need to think about as it relates to that is how that builds a pipeline to attract corporations who are looking for talent. And that's a part of the yay or no go as it relates to coming to Charlotte. Do we have that pipeline that's ready to take these jobs on day one? So I'd like for us to be thoughtful about that as we prepare for this. From the housing perspective, we all understand the AMI challenges and just the housing stock issue that we have, regardless of where you sit on the AMI. But I really firmly believe we need to consider the unhoused in this space. We are having challenges all around the city. In particular, Uptown is a hotbed for the unhoused and how they integrate into communities. And so thinking about that, solutions or multiple solutions for that. And then there's a question that I've been getting from some of my constituents, which relates to how do I get past that threshold? So when we have housing that's at a percentage of AMI, or we have senior housing where you have criteria that you need to meet in order to obtain that housing, far too many constituents are right underneath that threshold, right? And they earn just a few dollars above, and it's unattainable for them to get that housing. And they have come to me and my colleagues asking about, what about the in-between, that gray area where you're just above or just below? Are there any solutions for us within that space? So I'd love to think about that and deliberate about that during the summit so we can come up with some solutions for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Looks like all the committee members. Mr. Bukhari, do you have any feedback?
No, I was just gonna say, I think jobs, right? Jobs of today, the jobs of the future, tech jobs, energy tech, health tech jobs, tech jobs. It's really about building the pipeline for jobs, making sure those jobs are connected to the verticals of housing, of transportation, but I think our focus needs to be entirely on jobs. If we're not thinking jobs every day, I think we'll miss the mark here. So jobs.
All right.
Madam Chair, may I add something additional for Councilmember Anderson? Actually, I'm glad that you've already hit the ground running with the questions that are coming from your community as far as that in-between. Those were conversations that we were having a number of years ago, and I worked with the manager to start the conversation around rethinking our CDBG funds, because we had so many people that were just right over that threshold, and there was where they just needed a little stability to bounce to get to the next level. So it would be helpful I think Mr. Cagle to follow up with Manager Jones, because that conversation did start a number of years ago with trying to think outside the box and what flexibility we have, because there's not language saying that we can't. So I'm a fan of, if you're telling me by legislative policy that it's not something I can't do, then how can we go ahead and achieve it? What opportunities that we have? So that might be helpful, opposed to having to start all over. There might be some language and some information from when through Housing and Neighborhood Services under the amazing former Ms. Pam Weidman that we might be able to utilize. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Mayfield. A great point there. Also, as we are going through this assessment review, which will be coming up in front of this council as we discuss our next budget, it's very important that we address displacement, because every time we have a property assessment, I worry about our older residents being displaced because rising home values. A lot of residents, especially our seniors who live on a fixed income, they worry about how they are going to pay their property tax. So we have to be very mindful as we develop the budget, as we address important priorities. We got to make sure we are not displacing our aging residents, especially in gentrifying neighborhoods. So as we come up with different strategies, I would like us to focus on that. And then as we develop 2023 budget, let's also keep in mind that whatever decision we make from the property tax perspective, that will have a direct impact on displacement.
And Mr. Mitchell would like to be recognized.
Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to the intergovernment work that has been done previously, one partner we definitely need to invite is the county. I think the county now is playing a major role in affordable housing. And so we have one model that the two bodies have worked extremely well together. That was the Pepper Tree. I think we put in $8 million of our ARC funding, and the county put in $12 million. And so how do we duplicate that model as it relates to housing? Thank you.
Absolutely. Also, Mr. Cagle, do you know if we will be discussing any of our ARPA dollars distribution to Mr. Mitchell's point at the summit?
I believe that's certainly something that staff can, as we understand the comments and the direction from council, staff can incorporate into the agenda.
Yes, I would like to actually see that as part of our overall strategy. To Mr. Mitchell's point, I think it is important that we are working with the county, using the federal dollars that we have to address housing and jobs. So I know we were supposed to have a presentation on that at our last business meeting, but that didn't happen. So I would like to see that as part of our summit preparation. So if you could put that in one of the feedbacks.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Anything else, committee members? Okay. All right. Well, looks like we are ready to dive into our next topic, which is certainly very glamorous for me, the internal audit plan. So Ms. Tina Adams, I did have an opportunity to review the pre-read, and I have a lot of questions for our audit plan that's scheduled. So go right ahead.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and thank you all for allowing me to present our annual plan to you today. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of this presentation. I'll talk a little bit about the internal audit function, and then dive right into the audit plan, which encompasses our fiscal year 2022 audits completed and those in progress, the FY 2023, 2024 planned audits, and then other responsibilities of internal audit. Next slide. Thank you. So this is our internal audit department. Currently, there are 8 of us, ranging in tenure from 6 months all the way up to myself. I've been with the City of Charlotte for 25 years, all in internal audit. I am approaching my 1-year anniversary as city auditor, and it is a privilege to serve in this capacity. I'm glad that Council Member Ajmera finds it exciting. Not everyone does, but we do. But we do. And one of the goals of internal audit is to provide reasonable assurance that the city has an effective system of internal controls, as well as to assist management in evaluating city operations. And we do that in an effort to promote transparency and to build confidence in government operations. The majority of audits that we conduct are classified as performance audits by the GAO Yellow Book. And those audits require that we consider internal controls, fraud, and equity in all aspects of our audit, from the planning phase all the way through reporting. Occasionally, we do conduct what are known as agreed-upon procedures, as well as any investigations that a department may request of us or the city manager's office may request. Next slide. So with FY 2022 audits, these are audits from our previous audit plan that have been initiated. As of June 30th of this year, there were 10 audits in progress.
We do not have the same slides as you have. It's online, they print it out as online, whereas the blank.
So,
But it is
agreed.
online.
Yes. We will distribute a new hard copy with that extra page. We apologize. I just realized as we all did. Yes.
As I was saying, at June 30th of 2022, we had 10 audits in progress. 5 of those audits have been issued in the first quarter of this fiscal year. The remaining 2022 audits are in various stages of execution. We hope to issue the remainder of those by the end of this calendar year or early next calendar year. We're working with departments on getting responses and things of that nature and just wrapping up field work. Next slide, please. So the 2023-2024 audit plan. Each year, we finalize a plan in August. We meet with departments early in the calendar year of each year just to talk about risks and issues that they may have in their departments, as well as any areas that they feel like an audit would be beneficial. We also meet with the city manager's office. We consult the council priorities, the budget, and we use all of those tools to arrive at a prioritized list of audits that we plan to conduct. This is a 2-year rolling plan, if you will. We will not complete all of these in fiscal year 2023. The audits that you see highlighted in green are audits that we anticipate at least announcing in fiscal year 2023. Some of those will also be issued in 2023, but we should issue both of these by the end of 2024. Next slide, please. Also part of our 2-year plan, we include a couple of annual audits that we complete every year. One relates to the CMPD Vice Impress Fund, and the Vice and Narcotics Division within CMPD will ask us every couple of months to come in and review their documentation and cash on hand, just to make sure that they are following policies and procedures prior to having that fund replenished. The second audit relates to revenue collections. We have gone out annually throughout the fiscal year and conducted surprise cash counts in areas that collect cash for the city. The city's finance department has created an internal controls division, and they are doing a really good job of monitoring those sites. And so we've had a conversation with finance and are looking more towards in the future not conducting those site visits because we feel like we have a good system of controls in place related to that. But we will be looking at more so at department processes as it relates to cash collections. And for each one of those topics in that area, we summarize our annual efforts in a report that is issued. Follow-up audits. Earlier this year, we issued a couple of construction and project management audits, as well as a CATS advertising audit that we anticipate conducting a follow-up review for those in the next couple of years. Other audits on our audit plan may also result in follow-up reviews, and we will consider those as, as time permits and as we deem necessary. Audits under consideration are just, we're always looking out on the horizon. And so these are audits that may be initiated in FY 2023, 2024, just based on staff availability, and also just shifting priorities. We try to leave time in our audit plans each year for special requests that may come from the city manager's office or department. I think we have a question.
I have a question for you here. How often do you do a cybersecurity audit?
We've conducted a number of IT-related audits. We've, in conjunction with INT, we look at the efforts that they have underway in their departments as well. They are constantly looking at cybersecurity. The last one we conducted had a series of recommendations that have been implemented by information and technology, and some of them we see in the phishing emails that employees receive, just to discourage them from clicking on clickbait and that kind of thing. So as things continue to evolve, we always know that information and technology and cybersecurity are always a prioritized topic for us.
Okay, great. Yep, I think the readiness consideration on that, I'd just like to see how often you guys do that and then what the elements are of those audits as well. And then for the ERP replacement, is this an audit what's the outcome of the ERP replacement audit?
So the objectives for that audit would be determined as we get closer to ERP implementation, but our initial thoughts would be just to look at the process used to select a solution, and then the implementation plan around actually getting the ERP system implemented up and running.
Okay, so the procurement process and then the implementation.
And then the actual implementation.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So other responsibilities of internal audit include the employee hotline. We do administer an employee hotline through a third-party contractor. It is an employee-only hotline, and employees have the ability to submit via a phone call or an online report. Those reports and calls are forwarded to a staff member in internal audit, and we determine the disposition of those calls, whether it be us actually reaching out to a department and doing some inquiry, maybe visiting a department. A lot of these calls are human resources related, and those are referred to human resources. They use the same third-party vendor for their case management, so it makes it a very efficient process for us to refer those over to HR. Management transitions. Occasionally, we do have senior staff that transition away from the city. In those instances, we will conduct what we call a closeout audit, just to make sure that the policies and procedures around transitioning away from the city are followed. That includes making sure that assets are returned, that access to physical access to the sites as well as to systems is terminated, and all of that is done in a timely manner. Lastly,
For the employee hotline, do we also have an external audit done every year when we have that external audit opinion? Does that include employee hotline? Is that part of their scope as well?
that is not part of their scope. We don't have an external review of the employee hotline. We do have the ability to track the types of calls that come in, the departments for which they are related, that kind of information. We do monitor just to see if there are any red flags that may indicate, we might need to hone in on a specific area of concern for employees.
Right. Oh, I have seen especially in the private sector, where some of this employee hotline audit, it's also being done by external auditor, because the internal audit independent of the internal audit, which reports directly to the city manager's office. But that's a question for our external auditor.
Okay. Moving on with the recommendation status report, we created a recommendation status dashboard whereby we track recommendations from all of our audit reports and the various stages of implementation of those recommendations. We work with departments very closely to make sure that we are aware of progress being made towards implementation of recommendations.
Can we go over that a little bit more?
Okay.
Because I'm trying to understand the breakdown.
Okay.
We have past due, due soon, not action, in progress, and action.
Okay.
Past due, why?
So past due, when we issue an audit report, we ask staff or departments to give us a date by which they think they can implement our recommendations. In some instances, they are able to complete that. In some instances, for any number of reasons, they may not be able to implement those. There may be a resource issue, or there may be something planned in the future that will address it.
And how is that followed up so that we're tracking? Because just looking at the graph is concerning general services, but there's a challenge within finance and in human resources with recommendations being past due at the levels that they are. So what is the checks and balances within that?
So, like I said before, we work really closely with departments. We check with them as frequently as monthly, but most of the time quarterly, on the status of their recommendations. We document that status. Sometimes we adjust the due date. And the due soon status actually helps us to notify departments and say, hey, you indicated that you would have a recommendation implemented by this date. What's the status? Do you think you'll be able to meet that? Do we need to adjust it? But we work very closely with departments just to stay on top of where they are in the implementation process. A lot of times there are very reasonable reasons for why they haven't been able to do that. And so we do monitor it, and we do stay on track, on top of it.
And explain not action.
So some of the not action ones may be that the department, after consideration of the implementation, the cost benefit of implementing a recommendation, it may not have been deemed reasonable to implement that. So it was decided that we wouldn't take an action on that recommendation, but there may have been mitigating controls implemented that help reduce risks in those areas. The ones that are in progress, again, talking with departments, they may be at a certain stage of implementation. And then the actioned items are ones where departments have reported to us they have indeed taken steps to implement the recommendations, and internal audit needs to confirm that. And so we are in the process of conducting reviews or follow-ups to confirm that.
So my last piece really, I guess, would be for Mr. Cagle. When we receive these reports, it will be helpful if we're going to have a graph to have the breakdown under that graph. Why is it past due? Nothing is due soon, according to this graph. And then the items that are not action, because that ties into the broader conversation that council has been having regarding the expectations from departments with achieving certain goals. And if we have items that have been identified as a need and they are not being actioned or they are past due, it will be helpful to have a better understanding.
You mentioned finance as one of them. A lot of the recommendations from that were from the Grant Thornton did a internal controls review a number of years ago, and a lot of those recommendations, it's anticipated that a new ERP system will address that.
Okay.
And so that's why they're still open.
And that breakdown
Yes.
would be helpful.
Yeah, that's right.
Councilman Mitchell?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Madam
I
Chair, if
agree with Ms. Mayfield.
I may.
Ms. Mitchell?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow Councilman Mayfield. I do think if we can see this, as she mentioned, the actual project itself, name, and I like, if you have a comment section to say ERP would address that, I think it'd be helpful for us. I think the one that really worries me a little bit is the 18 not action, and so to me, that's one that kind of really piqued my interest. I'd be interested to see what those items are. And Ms. Adams, you seem like a very good team player. And so, do you ever set a due date, though, when you would like for the past due to move to due soon? Or you just...
Well, the due soon is based on the original due date.
Right.
So within a couple of months of that original due date, we'll get a flag in the dashboard that says these items are due soon.
Okay.
And if we've not heard from departments, we'll reach out to them.
Okay.
And further on in my presentation, I was going to show you where you can find the recommendation status report. It's actually on our website.
Oh.
And you can, there's a user guide, but I'd be more than happy to walk through it with any of you at any point. That actually details the information that you're asking for.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Ms. Adams, I did get an opportunity to review a couple of your reports, and as we go through audits in progress, there were several that I have questions on, but I'll let you finish up your presentation because my questions might get addressed.
Okay. All right. So you may ask, who audits the auditor? Since 2008, we've undergone peer reviews whereby an independent team comes in and looks at our work papers, our policies and procedures, and just the quality controls around that to make sure that we are complying with Yellow Book standards. And I'm happy to say that our last review was completed last month, and we received a pass with no deficiencies. Thank you. That is definitely a testament to our staff's dedication to providing quality audits, and we're very proud of this certification. Next slide. And this is the slide that I mentioned previously that points to the internal audit page on the charlottenc.gov site. And it includes all of the information I've gone over today, including the recommendation status report. There's a hot button. You can click on that. There's, like I said, a user guide that actually explains what each category means, and you can drill down and actually see the information that you requested. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Adams. And congratulations to the entire internal audit team on a job well done. Certainly the work that you do is very important from transparency perspective, but also to ensure that every dollar that is spent aligns with council goals and priorities. So it's very important work that you're all doing. A couple of questions on the audit report, conclusions and the status. So first is on airport CMR project. Was that was that area identified based on your conversations with the department head, or was that just regulatory?
We had conducted a CIP audit a couple of years ago, and one of the outcomes of that audit was that we wanted to drill down on the types of processes used in our construction. And so we identified projects throughout the city that we decided to conduct a review based on the delivery method, excuse me.
And I noticed under private developer funds audit, the conclusion on that report was that CDOT can strengthen internal controls to ensure that developer contributions are collected and that are spent as intended. Were there any specific recommendations that CDOT needs to implement as part of this exercise?
We did identify the opportunity for more reconciliation between the system that they use to account for those projects and Munis, our system of controls. There were a few discrepancies that we noted when we looked at, tried to tie numbers to Munis. But overall, the processes and procedures that they have in place are adequate to manage that process. There were just a few items that we felt like they could improve upon, just again, to improve transparency as it related to the developer.
Sorry. Okay. So would there be a follow-up report to ensure those controls are in place?
We use the recommendation status dashboard. All of those recommendations are included in that dashboard, and we follow up with CDOT to make sure that they are implemented.
Thank you. And the last question I have was the procurement compliance, and I know that's something in progress or it's being planned for next year. Is that correct?
It's in progress.
Okay, it is in progress. So does the scope include the CBI process specifically?
This audit is really geared towards looking at the compliance component of procurement services. They issue periodic compliance reports to departments related to what's called after-the-fact purchase orders, expiring contracts, and blanket purchase orders. And so we wanted to take a look at that process, drill down and look at departments who may be struggling a little bit more than others in those areas so that we could help identify some root causes for the issues that departments are experiencing and maybe be able to identify some recommendations for process improvements.
Thank you so much, Ms. Adams. And I know the council had raised some concerns specifically around the CBI process where multiple smaller contracts were sort of part of the bigger package, but it didn't come in front of the council. Would that also be looked at as part of the procurement compliance audit?
It won't be looked at as part of that audit, but on our 2023-2024 plan, we have a CBI slash B2G now audit that we are right now just researching. But we did a CBI audit a number of years ago, and the B2G Now system was just being implemented. And so the original thought was that we would go back and look at the implementation of that system and if it is adequately, if the data reported out is accurate and controls are in place to ensure that the data is accurate.
So is that a new tool to ensure that, if the same vendor ends up getting multiple smaller bids, it'll be considered part of the one procurement?
Like I said, we're still in the research phase of that audit, and so I'm not sure what the system actually tracks or what controls it is intended to monitor. That's something we can certainly consider as we continue to research and scope out the audit.
Yeah, I'd be particularly interested in that, to ensure that the implementation is meeting council's goals and priorities, specifically CBI goals.
So Ms. Ajmira, I will jump in here a little bit to say that a couple things related to the manager's commitment and the city's commitment to CBI, but also in reference to the manager's memo that recently went out. We will be the city will be updating the procurement policy to better meet expectations. And the finance department, Ms. Adams mentioned the finance department internal controls division. So the internal controls division, specifically to your question, how will we flag if there are multiple purchase orders issued for the same vendor, right?
Right.
And that was sort of the question and what happened. Our finance department internal controls division will be monitoring that so that we flag those beyond internal audit. Now, Ms. Adams may look at adding audits of that in the future, but our internal controls division will also help us on an ongoing routine basis to flag those and make us aware of when that situation arises or if that situation arises.
Got it. That would be very helpful. Thank you so much, Mr. Cagle.
And
That concludes my questions.
Mr. Mitchell would like to be recognized, please.
Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brent, I'm sorry, you might address it, but I started reading ahead. I apologize. Tina, but I thought the audit for the Charlotte Business Inclusion / BTG was really based on payment, making sure that our general contractors were paying our trade partners and subcontractors.
So that would be encompassed in looking at the internal controls within that system to make sure that the data reported out is accurate.
Yeah.
And that data would include payments.
Okay, good. Because I know we do get a lot of calls from a sub that's saying, I have not been paid yet, and we kind of inquire, where is it in the system? So, okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It's a very comprehensive audit. Thank you so much again to the internal audit team. Do we have anything else on this topic before we move on to our last topic? Okay. All right. Well, the last item we have on our agenda is our federal and state legislative update. I hope everyone had an opportunity to review our pre-read materials that Mr. Fenton had and his team had put together. Mr. Fenton, do you want to walk us through that?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, Dana Fenton with the City Manager's Office. And pleased to be here today to provide a federal and state legislative update. But first of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to Election Week 2022. As you know, we just don't have election days anymore. So there will be a lot happening. And also just to clarify is that my job with the city does not involve making political prognostications. I'd be glad to talk with you all, anybody offline about those in case you have any questions for me. But I'd prefer not to talk about that on camera for obvious reasons. So, but thank you very much. We have 4 things on the agenda. We'll bring up to date on the U.S. Congress and what we expect to come up next year. The North Carolina General Assembly, the same thing. Actually, they're not doing too much of the General Assembly right now, except getting ready to, running for re-election, that is. But we'll talk about what we see coming up next year. We'll continue the discussion about engagement strategy with the General Assembly, then the next steps. Next slide, please. Before I start with the U.S. Congress, I just want to make sure you all know that we have at least, I think, 3 members of our federal lobbying team from Holland Knight with us, attending virtually. And I can see Joe O'Brien up there. If Joe, you could just wave to everybody, that would be nice. he's waving. And I think on what I see up there, I believe that may be Shauna Watley. If Shauna, if that's you, you can wave too. Well, that's not Shauna up there, but I know she's on. Now, you all, I think Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Mayfield, and Mr. Bakari, you all know Ms. Watley. And I believe also, Madam Chair, you know Ms. Watley too. She's been working with us for quite some time, with me for quite some time. And then we also should have Rich Gold on there as well. He's been the team leader. Is that Rich? That is Rich up there. So I couldn't tell with the light in the room. So, but anyways, Rich is again, he's been with the team for a long time too. So I just wanted to recognize them before I start with this presentation. So anyways, for the rest of this year, after tomorrow, actually next week, I believe that the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House will be coming back to Washington to finish up their business for the year. And they got a few things that are going there. They have to pass a budget bill to fund the federal government for the FY 2023 fiscal year. And they also have to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. That is an annual ritual. There are many changes in the defense areas, and that have to be reauthorized, and of course, budgets approved. A couple other pieces of legislation that they may take up. One would be the Respect for Marriage Act, and also the second would be the Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act. Those are not have-to-dos for this year, but I know that there's going to be a big push to take them up, both of them up. Also, at the same time, I'd like to just alert you all, I think I might have had this in one of my updates, that one other thing that Senator Tillis from North Carolina is working on is trying to come up with some bipartisan immigration reforms that can be enacted. This would not be the broad, comprehensive reform that we often hear about, but it's things that can be done immediately. But that would only be taking place for the rest of this year, calendar year 22. And then, of course, we have the general election tomorrow, and right now, what kind of indicates out there, this is not my personal opinion, but rather history and the political outlook point to a Republican takeover of the U.S. House of Representatives starting next year. And the race for the Senate is considered to be a toss-up at this point. So it sounds like a really, really tight election.
Right.
And Ms. Anderson has her hand up.
You mentioned that the Respect for Marriage Act and the Electoral Count Reform are both hot button issues. Any insight or foresight on which one would probably be taken up first?
That's a really good question. If I could turn to Rich Gold, perhaps, with Holland and Knight to answer that question. Rich?
Sure. So both of those bills are pretty much finalized at this point in terms of legislative drafting language and bipartisan agreement. So the expectation is that they'll both be done most likely after we get back from Thanksgiving and before we take off for Christmas, perhaps as part of the omnibus appropriations measure, but they could also pass separately, through unanimous consent in the Senate and, on suspension in the House. So we're not expecting them to get hung up. A little bit unclear in terms of the order of which we'll move first, but we'll keep you all posted on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich. All righty. Next slide, please. Now for the next session of the Congress, it starts early January next year. A Republican leadership in Congress, as we see right now, that they would focus on a greater oversight of the administration. But there's also been some recent talk that they'll be taking a look at some other they call it oversight, but it's not necessarily oversight of the Biden administration. In this case, it's one of the subjects would be the looking at the extent of political, military, and business influence that the People's Republic of China has over the United States. That's been a hot topic for the last couple of years. Another issue that the Republican majority would definitely want to bring up is to try and get the expiring provisions of the Tax Cut Act from 2017 to be made permanent. Many of those tax cuts were temporary. They run out in fiscal year 2025, I believe. And so there would have to be a push here in the next few years to try to get those made permanent before any of those would lapse. So, and also at the same time, I think probably another part of the act from that year, and I know that Mr. Mitchell, you have a special interest in this, is the Opportunity Zone legislation. There are some provisions in there that expire, and that in just the next few years, and there's talk about maybe extending the lifetime of the act to fiscal year 2028. I believe it's either a 2 or 3 year extension, and a lot of that has to do with the pandemic because of what's happened the last few years. But more to come, and I'm sure that in the days and weeks and months after the election, you will be probably reading a lot about what about a Republican majority or potential majority would take up next year. Also, if the Republicans do take control, you could probably look to the Biden administration to not come up with any new initiatives, but they would focus instead on the implementation of the successes, the achievements from the last 2 years. And just a couple of them there, but very important to the city. The bipartisan infrastructure law of 2021 provides a new money for infrastructure. A large part of the infrastructure that we have, like for public transportation, highways, airports, sustainability, resiliency, and so forth, those are all covered under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Also, the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of tax credits and benefits for sustainability and resiliency. And then the recently passed CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, there's a lot of funding in there for higher education, especially STEM education. And there's also a good part of that chunk of funding is devoted to minority-serving institutions. And there could be some others. I haven't listed in here the American Rescue Plan Act from last year. I think for the most part of that funding has already gotten out the door, but I could be wrong on that too. So,
Mr. President,
Ms. Anderson has her hand up.
Thank you.
yes. Ms. Anderson?
I'm interested for the CHIPS and the Science Act, any additional added dimension or detail around how that could impact us regionally in the Southeast and specifically the state of North Carolina school systems?
I would be glad to get you some more information. I don't recall seeing how it would impact us locally or regionally or even the statewide school system. But I can look for that, and I know that there's a lot of excitement among a lot of the companies here in the region. They see this as good for business. And also the universities, of course, are looking at this. But I would be glad to dig into that for you to get more information.
Yep. Great for business, great opportunity from potentially from an economic development perspective, especially as we talk about, and I'm trying to bring this full circle into our conversation around the Housing and Jobs Summit, and how this may potentially inform some of the things we want to discuss as it relates to jobs and planning for that. So
That's a very, very good point. I remember a couple of years ago when the Safe Charlotte plan was adopted by the City Council that was in October, I think, of 2020. they illustrated an all-in approach. It had housing, transportation, public safety, workforce development, all in there together. So, but yes, you're absolutely right about that it could be very instrumental in helping us with other efforts.
Thank you.
Mr. Fenton, I have a couple of questions. You had mentioned earlier that Senator Tom Tillis is looking at a short-term immigration fix. Are we looking at H-1B visas and work permit holders and spousal requirements?
Ms. Ajmira, I know that that's an issue that he's looking at. He has spoken about that. I guess one thing is that we have a lot of unused H-1B visas out there that need to be extended. And I know that when we went to visit with him or with his staff earlier this year, that they were very receptive to the other issues with H-1B visa, whether it's the spousal requirements or even the dependent children. So these are issues that are I can't say right now as to whether they'll actually be addressed, but it's something that is being discussed.
Thank you so much. I have received a number of requests on that, specifically on H-1B work permit, and during pandemic, how some of those visa extension work permit were delayed, and there were consequences, especially from the family perspective, dependency. And I've shared some of those concerns. I think your way, if you could share those with Senator Tom Tillis's office as he works through this, because we have a large population of immigrant community here, and that contributes to our economy locally, especially in technology and medical field here. And some of their concerns need to be addressed in a short term while Congress continues to work on a long-term immigration reform.
Yeah, Ms. Ajmer, I know that the mayor sent a letter to the senator last month about the dependent children potentially aging out because of backlogs in processing the green cards, for example. And I'm sure that some other issues have been brought to his attention. I know that we talked with his staff about the need on the spousal requirements, but I think we've hit everything that we can on that. But we're always willing to share more information with his office as we receive it.
Sure. Thank you so much. And on the bipartisan infrastructure law, I know this was something that has come up several times, right? What does that mean for our region? What kind of funds are we looking at to address our regional infrastructure needs? If we could get some sort of report on that, that would be very helpful as we are working on our infrastructure bond referendum.
Yeah, I would be glad to get more information about that. I can share with you just very briefly that again, the $1.2 trillion is available. There's a lot of funding in there in the transportation arena. The city does receive some formula funding now because of the bipartisan infrastructure law for aviation, and we have enhanced formula funding for transit, which is both of those new revenue sources, new formula funding is very, very welcome to us. Now, there's a lot of opportunities to compete competitively for grant proposals, like the RAISE program we received a RAISE program grant last year for the Charlotte Transportation Center. Also, there are loan programs for water, wastewater, and stormwater. A lot of new funding was put in there. And those loan programs, of course, are administered by the state. I think I've touched on sustainability and resiliency before. And there's probably a few more things in there that I'm missing. There's a couple of loan programs that have to do specifically with transportation and with railroads that I haven't mentioned. But anyways, I'd be glad to get more information about that out to the committee. And there's just I know that there's a lot of interest in this region. The Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization has been has been at the forefront of that, working regionally with folks. And in fact, our own departments are working with the towns in the county, for example, on some of these things. So, but I'd be glad to get more information out to you all about this.
And Mr. Mitchell would like to be recognized.
Yes, just one moment. Mr. Fenton, it would be helpful if we could get a list of opportunities within the bipartisan infrastructure law. What some of the opportunities that we could tap into. I know that staff has already looked into it and have applied, but if there are additional that we could potentially tap into, that would be very helpful as we prepare for our infrastructure discussion.
I would be more than glad to get that to the committee.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mitchell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to bring this up because we're talking about the U.S. Congress, so I'm ask staff, if you don't mind doing a favor, go ahead and put on our calendars the NLC lobbying day in March, because I think it'd be key for us. Number one, we do know we'll have a new U.S. Senate replacing Richard Burr, so that'd be the first time that we can have some dialogue with that individual. But secondly, I think if council, we get caught up in March to be here before we know it because of the holidays, so if you all can go ahead and add those dates to our calendar, I think that we can make an effort, much as we have a good participation. I think the best turnout we had, we almost had 9 out of 12. And I think that's a strong message of our lobbying efforts and our priorities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Anything else from the committee on our U.S. Congress agenda?
Madam Chair, I just have one additional ask
Yes.
or request. When you come back with some information on the CHIPS and Science Act, I'm interested in seeing how those dollars are potentially allocated. As I'm understanding, there are about $150 billion that will be invested, both from a government but then private sector investment. And it could be an opportunity for us to bring high-tech manufacturing jobs to the state, to the region, to the city. And I'd like to see just preliminarily what the thoughts are, what the sentiment is in D.C. around investment in North Carolina.
Be glad to do
Thank
that
you.
for you. And Madam Chair, just one more thing on the U.S. Congress. One big thing I've left out already, or was at the bottom there for 2023, is that Congress will have to do the FY24 Appropriations Act next year. As soon as they get finished with this year's Appropriations Act, they're going to have to turn around and start on the next one. So, and that could always be an issue. We always look out for what's happening with those appropriation recommendations. So, Madam Chair, that completes the part of the presentation to do with the U.S. Congress. Next slide, please. We'll get to the North Carolina General Assembly in just a moment. I do want to make sure that you all know that 3 of the members of our state lobbying team from KTS Strategies are here. Ches McDowell, please raise your hand. Then we have Lauren Henderson, and then we have John Easterling. So, basically, the North Carolina General Assembly, they have a couple more times they're going to come in this year. Well, we don't know whether they're actually going to do any work or not. These dates were scheduled far in advance because, as you know, there's been a lot of litigation. And so they had these sessions scheduled just in case they had to come in. And so for the last few times, I think actually since July, they haven't done actually any business. They've only had pro forma sessions. So, and we could very well see that continue for the rest of this year. Tomorrow's election, again, we talked a little bit before about what could happen. Anything could happen, I guess. The Democrats this year are focusing on sustaining the governor's veto power in the General Assembly. And the Republicans want the supermajorities, of course, to overturn the governor's vetoes, and which also precludes the need for them to work across the aisle on controversial and sensitive issues. So there's a lot at stake tomorrow, and we'll just have to wait and see. Right now, the House, North Carolina House, 69 Republicans. There are 3 shy of the supermajority. And in the Senate, it's 28 Republicans, 2 shy of that supermajority. So we'll just have to wait and see. Next slide, please. Let's get to 2023 because the long session starts in January 11th. They'll have a one-day organizational session where they will elect the speaker and take care of a few other housekeeping items. And then next year, we do know that they will be focused on money issues. They have to pass a biennial budget next year for both fiscal years 24 and 2025. And one thing they're having to consider is the fear of a recession. I think it's been said before in this meeting that there's potentially have a recession later this year, next year. And so that's going to be top of mind for them. Now, they do have a pretty healthy cash balance in the general fund to help out, but of course, once you spend that money, it's gone. So they have to consider what the future revenue trends are before making those expenditure decisions. And then there's already 2 issues there we foresee coming up, K-12 education. The Leandro decision from the 1990s has been in the courts a few times since then. And this is the Supreme Court decision. Now, we don't cover education, K-12 education issues here, but it's basically, it would require a substantial new funding coming from the General Assembly for K-12. And I believe that the current order requires an additional $785 million each year for K-12 education. So, the Republican majority is fighting that on the constitutional basis that the legislature has the power of the purse and that the courts are overstepping their authority. So more to come on that. Transportation. Let's talk about statewide transportation needs for a moment. I think last month we did cite this as something good that happened in this year's General Assembly. Some new funding was put in for statewide maintenance and construction needs. But people recognize it's not going to be enough. You still have projects out there that will be delayed. And so there could be some discussion about more funding for transportation. And Mr. Mitchell has his hand up.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, Mr. Mitchell?
So, Dana, thank you for the good news. I think for all of us, though, one key issue for us is any of those roads are in our preview, City of Charlotte particularly. We get a lot of complaints about 160. I think a lot of citizens doesn't know that's a state-funded road. Mm-hmm. And so can you give us a list of the road projects in that transportation? It'll be curious. I know there's some conversation about W.T. Harris, and I think we need to do a better job of communicating to the citizens what are city-owned roads and what are state-owned roads. And 160 seemed to be causing a lot of problems. I know when she was the district rep, she would fuss a lot about me not proving no new development in the Berwick area. And I'm sure Councilman Wallaton is getting those same calls.
Now, I'd be glad to find out. I'll work with Cartbill on that information.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, and I think it would also be helpful because I know Independence was also in the same pipeline there with just so much congestion and traffic. I know that I'm not sure with the additional funding that state legislator had put towards transportation. How does Charlotte, what allocation did Charlotte get out of that? And I know that state Powell bill, that's something we do need to work on because I think there was $6 million that we had lost, and we do need to figure out a way to ensure that we do get that funding back. Was it 6 million or 8 million? I don't remember the exact number.
It's between 6 and 7 million.
Okay. Yes, I think we also need to look at that as we look at transportation bucket. And, the fear of recession, it's all across the board. I mean, we also have to look at that at the local level. And now, especially with the property reassessment, it's ahead of us. So there's a lot at stake here. Mr. Fenton, you're right, especially tomorrow's election. There's a lot at stake here. Thank you.
And Ms. Anderson would like to be recognized, please.
Ms. Anderson?
Thank you. I just wanted to very quickly underscore Councilmember Mitchell's request that be a holistic view of the state roads. I know we have several in District 1 that I receive a lot of requests and complaints about, that we're sort of handcuffed from a city perspective in terms of what we could do. So if that could be a holistic list, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. And transitioning from money to some of the policy issues that the General Assembly could be taking up next year. And let me just also say that this is only some of the issues. There will be a lot of other things that will be brought up. We would expect the General Assembly to treble up the notch of oversight of the Cooper administration. This year, there's been a lot of attention paid to the pace of recovery from in southeast North Carolina from Hurricanes Matthew and Florence, and especially with the number of homes that have been repaired or replaced because of that. So more to come on that. We do expect redistricting to come back up next year. The congressional seats that were set, or the districts that were set for this year, are only in effect for this year's election. So it's very likely they'll come back next year to change those. And there's also talk about, depending on how some court cases go and how other things look, taking a look at General Assembly districts again. So more to come. A couple of policy issues from last year that were not resolved. The first big one is Medicaid expansion. And that has the state Senate would like to, they passed legislation that would expand Medicaid, but they would also like to see some reforms to the current system, especially as it relates to talk about the ability of hospitals and other healthcare providers to build new facilities. And I can't remember what the name of that process is right now, but a lot of times there's strong disagreement between the Senate and the Healthcare Association, which represents hospitals, over reforming that system. Let's talk about sports gaming for a minute. Legislation last year was stalled to approve sports wagering around the state. We would expect that to come up again next year. There is a coalition of the major sports leagues and some of the franchises and others who are trying to get this in. And it could be another slog of this coming 2 years. Ms. Mayfield has her hand up.
Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fenton, can you give a little bit more information regarding the gaming? It says that the sports leagues have re-engineered their efforts to convince legislatures of the need for sports gaming legislation.
The need for sports gaming legislation, great question. I'm glad you asked. But what the franchise owners are going to be doing is to talk about how the new revenue coming in puts them on a better competitive position with other franchises in that same sports league, for example. So you could, for example, Boston has sports gaming, I understand, and it's made some of those franchises more valuable. So this could be something that could help raise the value of the franchises.
And I apologize for my naiveness in this arena of sports and gaming. So basically, to be able to gamble, so the franchise owners are pushing for legislation to be able to gamble on the teams?
Well, what they have is it's more than just the franchise owners, but it's the major sports leagues too.
To be able to gamble?
Yes, at specified sites. I'd be glad to get you information about last year's legislation, or actually this year, it was passed last year. I'd be glad, I have more detail about it that I can provide to you in the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Dana, just a quick time check. We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll try to speed through. The next one, the medical cannabis bill, the North Carolina Compassionate Care Act, that was not taken up by the House at all this year. It passed the Senate in '21, and the House said we need to consider that during a long session. So I guess there could be another attempt this coming session to try to get that through. Next slide, please. That really finishes up the update of the North Carolina General Assembly. I know we just have a few minutes to go.
Hey, Dana, because we have about 4 minutes to go, might I suggest to the committee and to the chair, would it be possible to send out information on the engagement strategy as written and then discuss it at the December 5th meeting? Would that be acceptable?
Yes, I'm okay with that. I believe, Mr. Cagle, this was part of our pre-read. At least I did receive this information, so I'm okay with the strategy that's been laid out here, which is really focuses on the regional strategy and including regional partners in our engagement sessions. But I'll leave that up to the committee to decide if you'd like to go ahead and provide feedback based on the pre-read materials, or would you like to defer this to next month's agenda? Committee members?
I'm all in favor. I don't have a hard stop, but I don't know time frame of other committee members.
Because we have a next committee meeting that starts at 2, so I believe staff needs time to arrange for the next meeting, which is the Economic Development Committee.
Got it.
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Ajibera?
I'm in agreement, Madam Chair, that we can push this to the next agenda for the next meeting.
All right. We will do that, and we'll send out additional information, written form, or resend out what we've already done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Proceed about 2 more slides, I believe, to slide number 11. And here's our next steps calendar and the congressional briefings that Mr. Mitchell talked about during the NLC conference. That conference is scheduled for March 26th through March 28th. And I've got one other day on there just in case we need to consider that. But the time frame in terms of determining which day would go up to the Hill, that's still to be determined. We'll have to determine that closer to that time.
Thanks.
And that concludes my presentation, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. So committee members, we will discuss feedback on the strategy that's being proposed here by the staff. Any questions, concerns before we adjourn for the day? No, we have had a couple of outstanding items. That was from the previous council. That was on council terms and districts. So could we also put that in our next council committee meetings agenda? Because I know that's a lot of material. That was like 6 pages.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, I guess with that, would like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Madam
Second.
Chair.
All right, all in favor, please
Aye.
sign off. Thanks. That was like 6 pages.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I guess with that, would like to make a motion to adjourn?